couple of months ago, everyone and their dog started posting stories about the TikTok historian who went viral and sparked controversy by her outrageous claims that ancient Rome never existed, and stuff like that. A significant number of people were puzzled why we are even seriously discussing this nonsense and promoting this person. Others went into the debunking mode and started to explain how wrong she was, which is quite easy to do. It must be noted that some of the commentators immediately proceeded to criticizing not the arguments of the TikTok historian, whose name is Donna and her username is Momlenial. So, not criticizing the arguments, but criticizing the person, and then promptly moving to direct insults, which is disgusting. To which Donna, Momlenial, frequently responded by doing exactly the same, and also adding some American twist to it, which included accusations of supremacism, anti-Semitism, and other isms. And she was doing it not only in the act of retribution, but sometimes just as a response to pretty much any criticism, even reasonable and polite, like the criticism which a popular YouTuber Metatron posted a while ago. As I mentioned, it's been a couple of months really, but I woke up only yesterday and I'm slow. So I decided to participate in this shit show in a desperate attempt to attract some followers. And also to talk about a couple of interesting problems which, in my opinion, deserve attention. In a way, this TikTok historian situation is an excuse to discuss certain things. I don't want to switch to the debunking mode and tell everyone how wrong Momlenial is. It's been done before and it is quite easy. I don't want to proceed to personal insults either. It's been done before and it is quite reprehensible. What I want to do is to ask a question. What if she's right?
Too much of the news is about what's wrong with America.
Amen, brother!
Well, tonight our top story is what's right with America.
What if some of her arguments actually make sense? To some extent. Maybe there's some hidden meaning. Maybe some of her claims are not as scandalous and ignorant as most people think. Maybe there's some kernel of truth behind Rome is not real, dude, and stuff like that. Let's analyze some of Donna's outrageous claims and find out what's going on. Ancient Rome never existed, ancient Rome isn't real. At first I thought that Momlenial means it quite literally, because this school of ultra-radical revisionism is actually out there. It's not a new idea. It is an old idea. Don't get me wrong, there's no problem with revisionism. Revisionism is a good thing when it makes sense, when it is good. And history is constantly being rewritten. And sometimes it is also a good thing. You get new understanding and you get new data, which you cannot ignore. Revisionism and source criticism, great. Skepticism and common sense, even better. But then there are theories that the entire history of antiquity was made up during the period of the Renaissance. Parts of this theory that engage in the source criticism are actually very interesting and quite well articulated. The conclusions are frequently absolutely insane. Since I have two channels dedicated primarily to antiquity, that fact alone might give you a hint about my position on the subject. I do believe that ancient Rome was real. What Momlenial wanted to say, or at least that's how I understand her words, is not this kind of outright revisionism I mentioned before, when people reject the existence of Greco-Roman civilization. No. She's talking mostly about the problems with the sources, their interpretations, misinterpretations of the archaeological evidence, malicious rewriting and redacting of history, and so on. Is it reasonable? Is it a thing? Do these problems actually exist? Yes. She just presents it in a quite insulting manner. She exaggerates things and adds some weird ideas on top. But yes, she addresses some real problems which are usually ignored. Like when she says that there are 0 primary documents and massive gaps in the archaeological records, so we don't really know stuff. We just essentially believe in the narrative that was created much later and has its flaws. Sounds outrageous and exaggerated. I wouldn't put it this way, but yes, she addresses a serious issue. The sources are quite bad. There is a significant body of primary or almost primary sources on classical antiquity, but some of these primary sources might be forgeries. The attribution of some of the sources is questionable, and yes, many works of antiquity were redacted, and it is acknowledged by any serious historian. How heavy they were redacted? Well, it's an interesting question. When were these works rediscovered? Because you see, there is no uninterrupted transition of knowledge from ancient Greece to modern Greece. We constantly talk about rediscovery of something and trying to figure out how authentic the sources are. And historians are frequently not critical enough. And then there's the general crowd that reads books written for schools, then watches films and sometimes documentaries produced for mass audience, and sometimes doesn't understand that all of the above mentioned not only contradicts these fringe theories and revisionism, of which they don't really know anything. No, it also contradicts the consensus of the academia. Come on, people still believe that gladiators were butchering each other in the Colosseum. It is a movie trope. This is not how professional sports worked, and not how it works right now. People believe that Gaius Caligula could promote animals, horses, to a position of a consul, and Commodus had 600 concubines, and Nero persecuted Christians and fiddled under inappropriate circumstances. That's just the tip of the iceberg, really. People believe that Constantine the Great was the first Christian emperor, while in fact you may have at least 5 different, relatively reasonable, mutually exclusive theories on the subject, given the state of the sources. And yes, the state of the sources, which is quite reasonable for some time, then suddenly becomes an absolute horror as we enter the crisis of the 3rd century. Even the conventionally accepted and more or less believable sources have a number of issues. Like Cassius Dio is stitched together from a handful of old manuscripts. A fragment here, a fragment there, and some parts of the work are lost. And one of the sources for this Cassius Dio compilation is a monk whose name was Zephylinus, who supposedly lived in the 11th century, although you can't be absolutely sure about that. And he made some sort of an abridgment of Dio. Some of the modern editions of this Cassius Dio compilation have useful footnotes that tell you that, okay, this piece went through the hands of this Christian guy. He clearly corrupted the text. If you listen, I don't know, to the audiobook of Cassius Dio, you may stumble upon something like, Dio says that Marcia, the mistress of Commodus, was a Christian. And you're like, yeah, interesting information. Christians in the 2nd century. But no, that's not Cassius Dio. That's Zephylinus. And that's not a conspiracy theory or something. It's a convention. If you read the physical book with footnotes, yeah, modern historians tell you to disregard this information since this is an obvious Christian interpolation. The guy was just sitting and corrupting the text. And he is the only source for this segment of Cassius Dio's work. He also might have some interesting translations or deliberate mistranslations of ancient texts. I read one translation of Cassius Dio that mentions how Romans crucified a severed head. And when Mamlenial says things like there were scriptoriums and they were rewriting history, rewriting original Greek and Roman texts, and destroying the originals, oh, well, yeah, they were doing just that. You cannot trust church documents and church sources when you have a thing called palimpsest. But it could have been worse. I mean, take a look at the Egyptology. That's just unbelievable. People might have discussions like, I like the style of Tacitus. Or, what Cassius Dio says about Tiberius seems to be exaggerated and unreliable. We possibly should trust Velleius Paterculus, a contemporary of Tiberius, although he obviously has some flaws. Or, my name is Niccolo Machiavelli, and I'm gonna analyze the first 10 books of Livy. So, there are histories, chronicles. And how many ancient Egyptian chronicles do we have? Take a guess. Greeks owned all of the trade routes. Power player, everything was Greek, all the sources are in Greek, Greece had all the economic and religious power, and so on. That's kind of exaggerated, especially the constant attempts to find Greek language everywhere and ignore the sources in Latin. Or pointing out that many Romans actually wrote in Greek, which they did. And there can be numerous reasons why people don't use their first language sometimes. You can trust me on this one. But Hellenization of Romans is an interesting and sometimes overlooked subject. People usually know stuff like Roman gods have Greek counterparts. They also frequently assume that Roman and Greek gods are the same, just different names, which is not true, by the way. They know that there was a significant cultural influence, but they underestimate the magnitude. If you tell people about the Greek colonies in the south of Italy, in Sicily, or in the south of present-day France, the vast majority will go like, what are you talking about? Greeks and Italy? They just don't know anything about it. They don't know that, for example, Naples used to be Neapolis, a Greek colony, and it's around the corner from the city of Rome. Romans were incredibly Hellenized right from the beginning. Everyone in the Mediterranean was influenced by Greeks. They had trade routes, they had colonies everywhere, and these colonies produced more Hellenized people because of the interactions and due to the nature of colonization, when different ethnic groups are mixing with each other. They just don't have enough people. There was a more or less comparable story with the Phoenicians and how they were colonizing the same Mediterranean and actually mixing with the Greeks and influencing their culture. They also founded Carthage as one of their many colonies, and they had colonies in Sicily, in Spain. All of this is very important and deserves attention, even in the exaggerated form. Edict of Milan and Edict of Thessalonica are not primary sources. And now we're back to our favorite subject, the sources. I assume that when Mamlenial is talking about the Edict of Milan and things like that, what she means is that we're dealing with religious sources that could be forged at a much later date. It is an actual problem and it should be addressed. I think all of the religious sources, and first of all, overtly Christian sources like the church edicts, should be a subject of merciless criticism. So yes, I agree that stuff like the Edict of Milan shouldn't be treated as primary sources. I absolutely agree with this idea. We're dealing with a religion and we're dealing with organizations that were forging historical evidence and were caught in the act numerous times. We are dealing with a con man. It is very hard to trust a proven con man. Obviously, I think that Mamlenial should apply this approach not only to Christianity, but also to her favorite Judaism. Otherwise, it looks a bit like cherry picking. Unfortunately, she proceeds to stuff like the Torah is 3,000 years old, it has Sumerian origins. Like, come on. Gazillion years old. Any religious text is a gazillion years old, like the Book of Mormon. It is also quite interesting to study when and where the 3,000-year-old Torah was first printed. Yeah, I know. They all kept it on scrolls for thousands of years. Mormons kept it on golden plates, by the way, easier to preserve. Smart people. Latin res gestae Augusti is fake. Well, could be. It is quite easy to forge an inscription. There are even museums that almost openly, say that up to a half of the inscriptions in their expositions might be forgeries. Yeah. And if res gestae Augusti is not fake, then it obviously reflects government propaganda of the period. Do I believe that res gestae, or the Latin part of it, is fake? Not really. But yeah, interesting opinion. Worth listening to. I mean, you can operate, and you should operate with multiple theories at once, if the theories are more or less reasonable. You can measure their probability. More probable, less probable. Yeah, but they may exist in your head simultaneously, and sometimes you cannot be 100% sure about any of them. Mamlenial also speaks of geological weathering on the letters. And it is quite interesting. That is something you should inspect, and you actually can see it with your own eyes. She's most probably wrong in this particular case. But yeah, interesting observation. The forgery of Cicero, Plato's Republic, and so on. Once again, criticism of the sources and the stories of their reappearance. Sometimes very suspicious stories. And once again, I know it may sound weird and offensive, but she has a point. I mean, I absolutely fundamentally disagree with the idea that Plato's Republic is a forgery. But she has a point. This is an actual problem that should be discussed, as I've mentioned before. All this, it was never tested, we don't have the originals. That's true. All of these rediscoveries, and most of the stuff we have right now comes from rediscoveries, are usually not tested. Originals disappear immediately after the book is copied. Fantastic stories. But some of them are just that, stories. Some of the sources have a weird backstory, but they are not forgeries. They just have a legend of rediscovery. And some of them, yeah, forgeries. Probably. Plato's Republic? No, you cannot forge Plato's Republic. It defies logic. The content of the Republic is basically something you cannot forge, unless you're a genius who decides to write one of the greatest books in history and then publish it under the name of a long dead Greek philosopher. That's not how it usually works. No. But when we're talking about texts that don't require superhuman cerebral capacity or something, it is a reasonable assumption. It is true for some rediscovered ancient literature. It is true for some of the rediscovered historical accounts. I mean, yeah, the Annals of Tacitus is most probably a forgery. This idea is considered a fringe theory or extreme hypothesis, but there is a serious literature on this particular subject. Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall can be proven to be of Roman construction. That kind of makes people in Britain reasonably angry. And I understand the outrage of British historians, especially because she's absolutely right. I mean, right until this very moment, I was trying to find some kernels of truth and make a case that some things Millennial says make sense. Sometimes it is just weirdly articulated, hidden behind extravagant claims, and delivered in a condescending tone. But Hadrian's Wall, yes, you cannot be sure that Hadrian's Wall was, first of all, built by Hadrian or Antoninus. And you cannot be sure that it is a wall or that it was built by Romans. But it is very probable and maybe even quite likely. But you cannot be sure. It is a theory. They teach it in schools, but it's a theory. And it is a nationalistic theory. Britain has a tradition of exaggerating their Roman presence on this territory. Here's a short story on how this wall is attributed to Hadrian. There's a reference in the Unreliable Historia Augusta that Hadrian built a wall. Also, there's one inscription. 2/3 of this inscription don't exist. But if you use your imagination and reconstruct the text with, some imagination again, you can find Hadrian's name there. Maybe. That's it. No, seriously, that's it. Millennial is also very skeptical about the baths in the city of Bath. I don't have sufficient knowledge about this particular structure, but I know a couple of things about Roman architecture in Britain and how the government shamelessly promotes each and every ancient-looking stone as a Roman artifact. Here are some pictures for you. This is an amphitheater in Rome. You know this one. This is another amphitheater on the territory of present-day Croatia. And this is Tunisia. This is France. And this is Britain. And this is Britain. This is obviously also Britain. Do they have any structures we can safely identify as amphitheaters? You know, like we do in continental Europe or in North Africa or Asia Minor? No, not really. They exist mostly in the imagination and in Assassin's Creed Valhalla video game, which I like a lot, and I like how they probably inadvertently deliver the message about the consequences of the fall of the Roman Empire and why this game is actually a Roman post-apocalyptic game. But now you cannot be so sure about cyclopean amphitheaters in Britain, and you can't be sure about the attribution of Hadrian's Wall. Ta-da! That's all for now. I hope it was entertaining. entertaining enough to get accusations of supremacism and anti-Semitism. There's a subscribe button under this video. If you press it, you'll see how it changes color. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.